Cleopatra was the most beautiful woman in the world. Emperors waged wars for her, and Egypt was flourishing. But was it enough?
They're from Germany. I did not even speak the language.
Approximately 2,000 years later, Catherine showed the world that you don't need beauty and charisma to win. Pure intellect can build an empire and set the world stage for generations to come. But in the end, which queen brought more prosperity to their people? And who ruled men better? Let's discuss it in today's episode of Light's History. From the ancient world to the modern age, few women have captured the imagination like Cleopatra and Catherine the Great. These two queens were not only rulers of vast empires, Egypt and Russia, but also masters of power in a world dominated by men. Cleopatra VII, the last active pharaoh of Egypt, ruled from 51 to 30 BCE, a time when Rome was the world's superpower. She was more than just a beautiful queen. She was a shrewd politician who used her intelligence, charm, and boldness to influence some of the most powerful men of her time, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. According to historians, Cleopatra spoke several languages and understood the complex politics of Rome better than most of its leaders. Her alliance with Caesar helped her regain the Egyptian throne after a civil war, and later, her romance with Antony was as much a political strategy as it was passion, aimed at maintaining Egypt's independence in the face of growing Roman dominance. Cleopatra's power was legendary, not just because of her relationships, but because she commanded her own army and navy, led battles, and governed one of the richest kingdoms in the ancient world. At the height of her rule, Egypt produced nearly 40% of the world's grain supply, a critical asset for the Roman Empire, making Cleopatra's influence over Rome even more vital. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video so far. Catherine the Great ruled Russia from 1762 to 1796 and transformed it into a global superpower. Starting as a German princess with no direct claim to the throne, Catherine seized power after a palace coup and ruled for 34 years, longer than any other Russian female monarch. Under her reign, Russia expanded its borders by over 200,000 square miles, reaching into parts of modern-day Ukraine, Poland, and Crimea. Catherine was also a major patron of the arts and education, bringing the ideas of the Enlightenment to Russia. Yet, much like Cleopatra, Catherine's personal relationships were a key part of her political strategy. She maintained a series of powerful lovers, often elevating them to high positions in the government and military. These men were not just companions, but political allies who helped her control the sprawling and often turbulent Russian court. Historians note that Catherine corresponded with European philosophers such as Voltaire and Diderot, showing her sharp intellect and political savvy beyond her romantic ties. Despite ruling a far more complex and vast empire, Catherine used the art of influence to keep powerful men loyal, balancing love, power, and politics with remarkable skill. So here we are, looking at two women separated by nearly 2,000 years, but united by their exceptional ability to rule both empires and the men within them. Cleopatra and Catherine the Great both ruled through influence over powerful men, but their strategies and philosophies on leadership were distinct, reflecting their personalities and the political worlds they navigated. To understand these differences, let's look at one key example from each queen's life. For Cleopatra, her relationship with Julius Caesar perfectly illustrates her ruling style. When Cleopatra was fighting for her throne, Egypt was in chaos. Instead of relying solely on armies or traditional power, she used personal charm and political savvy. Legend says she had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence wrapped in a carpet, a dramatic move to make a memorable first impression. Cleopatra knew that winning Caesar's loyalty meant securing her reign and Egypt's independence. This encounter wasn't just romance. It was a calculated act of seduction as diplomacy. She relied on emotional connection and personal influence to rule through the men around her, turning them into protectors and allies. Her philosophy was clear. Ruling men meant captivating them with charm and intelligence, creating loyalty through personal bonds that translated into political power. Catherine the Great's way of ruling men was more structured and strategic, best seen in her handling of Grigory Potemkin. Potemkin was one of her most trusted lovers and political allies. But unlike Cleopatra's often emotionally charged relationships, Catherine's partnership with Potemkin was pragmatic and political. She appointed him to lead military campaigns, govern territories, and manage court affairs, knowing that his success would strengthen her rule.
Sparsely populated, they were settled by Russian colonists under the supervision of Prince Potemkin, Catherine's advisor and lover.
Catherine's philosophy was to build a network of loyal men who owed their power directly to her. She managed these relationships like pieces on a chessboard, promoting, balancing, and sometimes discarding them to maintain control. Potemkin's loyalty wasn't born just of affection, but of political necessity, and Catherine used this to expand Russia's borders and modernize her empire. In short, Cleopatra ruled through seductive diplomacy and personal loyalty, making men feel they were part of her emotional and political world. Catherine ruled through calculated alliances and political control, building a power structure where men's ambitions were tied to her authority. These examples show two different philosophies, one ruled by heart and charm, the other by mind and strategy. When we look back at the legacies of Cleopatra and Catherine the Great, we see two very different outcomes, not just for their empires, but for the men who lived under their rule. Under Cleopatra, men lived in a world charged with passion and drama. Her court was a place where loyalty was won through personal connection and emotional bonds. Men like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony weren't just political partners. They were lovers, allies, and sometimes pawns in a highly charged political game. Cleopatra's reign, however, was marked by constant conflict and uncertainty, ultimately ending in the fall of Egypt's independence and the suicides of both Cleopatra and Antony. For the men around her, life was volatile, high risk, and deeply intertwined with her powerful charisma. Cleopatra inspired devotion and fierce loyalty, but her reign didn't bring lasting stability for Egypt or for the men who served her. Meanwhile, Catherine's rule was the complete opposite. But was it good enough for historians to call her a better leader? Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. Catherine the Great ruled over a far larger and more complex empire, and men under her reign often benefited from the stability and reforms she implemented. Catherine's Russia was a place where nobles, generals, and advisors could rise through merit and loyalty, often rewarded with land, titles, and power, provided they aligned with her vision. Men lived in a more ordered society, one where loyalty was transactional but steady. Catherine's pragmatic alliances created an environment where men could thrive within a system that promised rewards for service and obedience. When we ask who was the better leader, the battle between seduction and intellect leans heavily in favor of intellect. Catherine's pragmatic, strategic mind ensured a longer, more stable reign and a stronger empire. Cleopatra's brilliance and charm made her a legendary figure, but her emotional leadership style was less able to secure lasting power against the rising Roman juggernaut. In the end, Cleopatra ruled through heart and personal allure, creating intense but fragile bonds with powerful men. Catherine ruled through intellect and political mastery, building a durable system where men's ambitions were aligned with her authority. The better leader was Catherine the Great, who showed that while seduction can win battles of influence, intellect wins the long war of empire building. Modern leaders can learn from both Cleopatra and Catherine the Great by blending emotional intelligence with strategic thinking. Cleopatra's ability to forge deep personal connections shows the power of charisma and persuasion in building loyalty, skills useful in diplomacy, business, and leadership today. Catherine's legacy teaches the importance of long-term vision, calculated alliances, and system building. Today's most effective leaders use charm to inspire, but intellect to govern. Whether leading a company, a country, or a movement, success comes from knowing when to win hearts and when to move pieces on the board with cold, strategic precision. The best leaders master both. But do you think that if Napoleon had access to tanks and airplanes, would he have conquered all of Europe, maybe even the world? Or would he have made the same fatal mistakes as Hitler? Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Bye for now.